There are legends that warn against whistling in the woods at night, not to follow voices that sound like someone you love. Because some things don't hunt to survive, they hunt with unquenchable hunger for human flesh. Tonight on ParaTruth Reborn, we're going deep into the frozen wilderness of Canada with investigator and filmmaker Jason Hewlett, the creator of Tracking the Wendigo, a documentary inspired by a modern witness who swears she encountered something that shouldn't exist. Was it a legend, a spirit, or a creature of sorts that still walks the forest today? Buckle up, because tonight we're tracking the Wendigo.
Welcome to ParaTruth.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to ParaTruth Reborn. We are live on 107.7 FM New Orleans, 105.3 FM on the Gulf Coast, and of course, the United Public Radio Network. My name is Erik.
And I'm Justin.
And today we are joined by Jason Hewlett, who is a paranormal investigator, researcher, author, and filmmaker from British Columbia, Canada. He is the co-founder of the Canadian Paranormal Society, the co-creator, writer, and director of the award-winning web series We Want to Believe, and appears in the Small Town Monsters documentaries Cursed Waters, Creature of Lake oh my goodness, I'm sorry, guys. Okanagan, right? Is that how it's said?
Okanagan, yeah.
Okanagan. And On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Origin. His latest book, Heart of Ice, Tracking the Wendigo, released on October 6th, published by Small Town Monsters Publishing. It accompanied the documentary Tracking the Wendigo, which debuted October 26th. His latest documentary, Sasquatch Legacy, released on December 7th. He's also the host of Paranormal Theories, a weekly radio show on Sandcastle Radio out of Florida. Jason, welcome to ParaTruth Reborn. How's it going?
Good. Thanks so much for having me on. And Okanagan is a tough word for people who aren't from the area. It really is.
Okay. Sorry for messing that up. I even looked it up too to make sure I was pronouncing it right earlier.
It gets everybody. If you're not from BC or Canada, man, it gets everybody. So it's all
like
cool.
Lake Ogopogo too. It's one of those
Yeah.
ones that's just not in our normal language.
No, it's its own thing. It's all based on the Indigenous languages up here, right? So
Right.
Yeah.
Well, now we have you on, of course, to talk about some Wendigo lore and documentary in the book in particular. But before we really dive into the meat of this, what really first drew you specifically to Wendigo lore out of all the other entities and legends out there in our world?
It started as a kid, actually. I was a comic book nerd, and I read like a lot of Marvel comics. And one of my favorites as a kid growing up was The Incredible Hulk. And there was an issue of The Incredible Hulk from the early 70s. So obviously I found it secondhand, but where the Hulk fought a creature called the Wendigo in Canada. And that was also the same issue that introduced Wolverine to the Marvel comics. And I just thought it was a cool comic book character. And so I would draw the Wendigo myself in my own comics as a kid. And it was portrayed there as just sort of this very white, hairy Bigfoot with a tail. And the cannibalistic aspects were downplayed a bit, just sort of mentioned. So, but I thought it was a comic book villain until much later in life, when I realized it was actually a very real Indigenous story up here in Canada, and that there are people who believe there are these creatures who are currently wandering the forests, hungry for human flesh. So that's really where my interest started.
That's awesome that I saw it in the documentary, and then you're bringing it up now because I read that comic as well.
Oh, cool.
I was a huge fan of Wolverine growing up, and when I saw that, I'd kind of known the Wendigo legend, but again, not nearly as in depth as I do now. So it's kind of fascinating that kind of sparked your interest in it.
I think it got a lot of people. If you're a kid reading comics around that era, or even a little bit later, right? Because it was been republished in trade paperbacks. But it was just, I think it shows how the character is almost the cryptid is so much more well known, I think, in pop culture than amongst maybe cryptid lore.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
No, 100%. And as someone, I don't, you see behind me, I've got like all these statues of DC comic characters. I'm a collector, and many groups of collectors, they're often posting stuff or pretty regularly about how they would love to see a statue of the Hawk versus the Wendigo, and they want this high-end collectible of that. So it's something that is very, very much popular in pop culture, and is still gaining traction even today.
Well, I think that's why, I think I'd say in the end why the movie and the book exist from Small Town Monsters, because it is well known enough, and it's become more popular in the last 20 years. I think that when it was featured in the first season of the TV show Supernatural, that really pushed it into the modern lexicon. And then a movie came out a few years ago called Antlers, which is very much about the Wendigo. There's the video game Until Dawn, which features Wendigos in it, and even a character named Jack Fiddler, who is a very real Wendigo hunter here in Canada. So I think it's out there more and more and gaining this traction that it kind of just spoke to me, time to do a documentary about it that tackled the subject matter seriously and have a book to go along with it. Because previously, I think the only real book was what Chad Lewis wrote called Wendigo Lore, which came out a few years ago. And his was, I think, the first really serious deep dive into the lore surrounding it. And then so mine was sort of the next evolution of that.
Now, what was the original report that landed on your desk and made you say, okay, we have to follow this. We have to document this?
Well, I was kind of already researching it at the time, the book. I didn't know if there was going to be a film or anything, but while I was researching it, I had heard from someone locally, like someone I kind of knew, casually kind of thing. We were talking. And he's like, "What are you working on next?" And I'm like, "I'm working on a book about the Wendigo." And he's like, "My wife thinks she saw one, actually, just this past January." So this is going back to 2024. And basically, yeah, they live in a community a half hour out of the town where I live called Pinnetan. And she was driving home from work here in Kamloops, where I live. And on the side of the road, as she's getting into the community, and it's rural and it's dark and it's not well lit, she saw something on the side of the road that was tall, wearing like a cloak, and had kind of a deerish shaped head with antlers sticking up. And it's like literally one of those, like you catch it, you kind of just register what you're seeing. And it catches your eye and then it's gone, and she'd driven past it. But there had been issues at the house where they were living, where there's some other paranormal activity, and her brother had been living there and struggling with addiction, which he had just kind of succumbed to. And her husband, who was a gentleman I was speaking to, kind of when he heard her description of it, looked it up and said, "It sounds like you saw a Wendigo." And of course, the Wendigo is like a consumptive spirit. So he kind of hypothesized that because of what had been going on with the brother and the other paranormal activity, could be potentially what she saw. And that kind of kicked off an investigation that became part of the book, and also the wraparound sequence in the actual documentary itself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Now, one detail you actually just mentioned there about the Wendigo is that she thinks she saw something with antlers. Antlers or horns is not something that's originally associated with the Wendigo, as far as I understand. Originally, they were bald or had like patches of fur or something like that. So, if that were the case, I mean, how does the Wendigo end up going from this bald-headed creature to something with antlers? Is that something that's just more of the mind that's kind of developing this, or does the spirit kind of manifest itself per, the legends?
It's interesting because when the Wendigo started, it wasn't even a creature. It was a state of mind. You thought you were being taken over by something that was making you want to eat your loved ones. You started seeing people as game animals, as food. Mm-hmm. So it's morally a psychological, more possessive state. And it wasn't until Algernon Blackwood wrote his novella, The Wendigo, that it was even portrayed as a creature, any kind of physical being. And yes, initially it was portrayed as a bald, almost rake-like creature, skeletal, very thin in the woods, sometimes with little patches of hair. And somehow, over like the last 100 years, these antlers have started showing up up on them. And I guess there's some indigenous tribes that would say it had antlers, and then most said it didn't. But it's just one of those things that as this story has kind of gone on through time, it's been added to, which was interesting. I mentioned the video game Until Dawn earlier, and in the video game, Wendigo are portrayed without antlers.
Okay.
So, but the more, and even in that Supernatural episode, it didn't have antlers either.
Right.
But for some reason now it does. And that's just, people think they see something that looks like it's got antlers in the woods, and they're automatically saying, oh, that's a Wendigo.
Right.
When it could be anything. You could be misinterpreting something you're seeing,
Yeah, oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I misinterpreted a pine tree once for Bigfoot, so I totally
happens.
understand it. It happens, right?
Yeah.
But me and Justin and I, we always mention this because there's sometimes like a mass influence. Like people have this idea of what a certain entity or creature should look like, and then suddenly that creature starts taking on those attributes. And so I was wondering if maybe that could be a possibility at least, for the Wendigo suddenly developing these antlers, because there are more and more people who, I'm assuming they find it more spooky that he has antlers or would have antlers. And because of so many people kind of their minds melding together, and it could create this kind of, new entity or a new attribute to the entity that it takes on.
I think so. And I even kind of talk about that a bit in the book, that I think because of the Wendigo and how it's changed over time, and there's so many different interpretations of it. It feels like that, did belief create like a tulpa effect? Did the belief create suddenly this physical creature that's out there, roaming the woods? And that to me, and I hate explaining an unknown with another unknown, but I could see that happening, that you just, and that, hence it's changed over time, and we're seeing it this way. So yeah, that could be possible. Right. And that's why now people are, seeing these horned creatures roaming in the woods. I mean, I think people they get very excited, as something becomes more popular, they start seeing things, they misinterpreting other things. I had someone mention to me after, before the movie came out, that there's a barn near here that was possessed by a Wendigo. And I'm kind of like, well, Wendigos don't possess barns. They kind of take over people, if they're real at all. So I think you're right. The human mind and in society and culture likes to kind of just shape things as it goes along.
Now you've kind of gone over like what the origins of the Wendigo are, and kind of what made you really realize that this was something more than just a story. But one thing that I found really fascinating in the documentary is the story about Swift Runner. So can you tell us a little bit about who Swift Runner was and what your thoughts were on this story?
Well, Swift Runner was a Cree hunter trapper guide for the Hudson's Bay Company, and worked with the Northwest Mounted Police, which are now, of course, our Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And he was someone. These where the story went from being sort of this Indigenous myth and crossed over into Canadian criminal law, because he showed up in St. Albert, Alberta, saying his family was dead, and they died in this really harsh winter, and there was no food and everything. But he was looking really fit. He was a big guy anyways, but he was looking a little fit, like he hadn't starved at all. And at night, he would start screaming in his sleep that a Wendigo was trying to make its way into his room and take him over. And so what basically happened, to make a long story short, he eventually took people and the police to the Tuatna Valley, where his family had died, and it turned out that he had basically eaten them. He'd killed and eaten them, and they saw the remains of the family and bones and everything like that. And it basically came out that he said he was possessed by a Wendigo, and he ate his family one at a time, the last victim being one of his sons. And so he was taken to Fort Saskatchewan, where he was basically tried, and the first person legally hung in Western Canada. And even at Fort Saskatchewan, when he was in these tiny jail cells, he was going on about that the Wendigo was still trying to get into his cell and possess him, which would then, of course, make him to continue to eat people basically until he was stopped. So when he was finally hung, which was in a cold December day, he was ready. He was like, it took a long time, and he was really upset it was taking so long, because he was just ready to die, because he was so afraid that he would be possessed by this being.
Sure.
Yeah, the one thing that you mentioned on the documentary was, or maybe it was somebody else, that can you imagine that last son realizing that his dad ate all of the rest of his family, and then he was going to be the last one or the next one. And I can't even imagine, like, even thinking back to like Jeffrey Dahmer's victims and stuff like that. It's one of those things that it's like it's frightening, and also the psychology that you had to have gone through to do those atrocities is something to be believed or understood, because I couldn't eat my family, let alone another person, period. So
Well, and that's where the psychosis comes into play, right? Like, is this person is either really being possessed by something that's making them do this, or they believe it so strongly within their culture that when they suddenly start having these urges, or or he could have just decided to kill and eat his family and he blamed it on the Wendigo story. You know what I mean? And there's a whole bunch of possibilities there. But regardless, it's shocking. That's Chad Lewis who relayed that, because he was in the Tuatna Valley in the middle of winter researching his book. I was there in May, so it was like nowhere near as cold and there's no snow, but it's a remote place. There's nothing around. Couldn't imagine back in the late 1800s just being there and having this crime happen. And yeah, you're right, being the victims of this person doing that.
yeah, well, like lycanthropic disorder too, for werewolves.
Yeah, it's there's actually a really good movie about that called Where, where they sort of talked about that in the film, and it was like, yeah. Anyways, we're off topic, but yeah, there's these parallels though to these other stories around the world, which kind of makes you really wonder, like it's a chicken and egg kind of thing, right?
For real, yeah.
Well, now, in regard to the actual legend of the Wendigo, do we know exactly where it originated and what tribe it originated from?
We just know it's primarily Algonquin Cree.
Okay.
The origins of it, like we say in the film, no one really knows where exactly the story started. We just know how it's supposed to work. You know what I mean? Like you behave in a certain way that is selfish and detrimental to others, and the Wendigo will come and take you over, make you eat your loved ones, and then basically just keep committing these acts of murderous cannibalism until you're stopped. And it sounds really hard to stop a person when they become a Wendigo. You either have to melt the heart, which turns to ice, by pouring hot fluids down the throat to do that, which you got to think that's going to do incredible damage anyways. And then, or you dismember the body, and either burn it or sort of scatter the remains on like consecrated ground. So you kind of even can see parallels to the vampire story there as well. And even in some stories that we researched, silver is needed. It needs to be a silver weapon, which dives into, like you said, lycanthropy and werewolves. So it's a really fascinating thing. And then obviously then at some point, once you were also taken over, you became this monster, cursed to roam the woods, even eating yourself because you're so hungry. And this apparently you just keep going until you consume so much of your body that you're done.
And that's where that whole idea of the Wendigo not having lips comes in too, where it would eat its own lips off and so on.
Yeah, that's
crazy story.
Right?
That was another part of the legend I had never heard before, that the creature or person, whatever, starts eating themselves, not just other people.
Yeah, that was new to me too. So was when Chad Lewis was kind of talking about that and Morgan Knudsen, I was like, holy cow, like, this is hardcore.
Now, was there a moment during the investigation where you're personally like, there's something to this, this is real, there's something off that makes this a genuine legend or a genuine story?
Yeah, no, it was, I kind of going up to Alberta to do my research, which is like the first thing I did. Like once I kind of knew that something was happening with this project, I went up to Alberta and I connected with Morgan Knudsen and Alicia Perot-Warner and Michael Brown. And we spent several days kind of like tracking the Wendigo story, starting with Swift Runner and then all these other stories in the area, and even some personal encounters that they had. And just the fact that people up there really believe this, like this is a serious part of Alberta history. And there are people who still believe that Wendigos are out there, and that, you know, if you behave in a certain way, the Wendigo can come and take you over, especially when you go into the smaller rural towns, and people don't like talking about it. They don't even want you to mention the name. And I'm like, wow, like I've been investigating the paranormal for more than 20 years, but this is the first time where it's like, it really seemed to scare people, these stories and this legend, and yeah, that they're having sightings to this day, really struck me. So even in this kind of modern area of like high science, this story rings true for a lot of people. And as I talked to more people and interviewed Chad Lewis, like he would say that's the same thing. And, you know, he's down in the States, and there's people that still believe, tribes down there of the Algonquin Cree that still really believe the Wendigo's a real thing, and it's really bad luck to talk about it. So even though I can't say for sure what I think the Wendigo is, there's something to it, and people believe in it very, very strongly.
Okay.
Now, what is like? So we already talked a little bit about pop culture, but what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you see in pop culture regarding the Wendigo that maybe people should be a little more hesitant about?
Ooh, misconceptions. That's a tough one. I mean, it is primarily a cold weather thing. So if you're seeing, like, you know, people seem to think they're seeing them at all times of the year, but it's primarily a cold weather thing. It is related, you know, to cannibalism. It's not a skinwalker. They're two completely different things. They seem to get mixed up a lot. Skinwalker is a person who can kind of change themselves into these other things. It's a Wendigo is just like, you are a Wendigo. And if you become a creature, you go from person to monster. That's kind of the really big one. I think a lot of stuff gets muddied, you know, where I can't really pull one apart from the other, but you're not going to see Wendigo in Florida. I really doubt, like, the people I've heard reports from Vancouver, Canada, and I don't know if I really believe that. I think people might be seeing something else and just attributing it to the Wendigo. So that's a really hard question to answer, because I think the story itself has been changed with time, and it would even change based on different parts of Algonquin Cree lore. Yeah, that's a good one.
Now, did you consult with any Indigenous elders or storytellers or anything like that on this project? And how did their perspective kind of shape your approach?
The primary one that I got to talk to, I was really thankful for, it was Alicia Perot-Werner, who's of the Cree tribe up in Edmonton in northern Alberta. I did talk to a podcaster, and I really apologize. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she had an Indigenous podcast. They did an episode on the Wendigo. And I couldn't interview her for the film, but I interviewed her for the book. And same with Amanda Quill, who's a paranormal investigator out of Vancouver. Again, not for the film, but I interviewed her for the book. And that was really important to me to include that, because here in Canada, all these stories are Indigenous stories. And as much as I can, I want them to be telling them. The hardest part is getting them to talk about them. I think one part, they're very protective of their stories. Two, they take something like the Wendigo really seriously, and they don't see it as a good thing. You shouldn't be talking about it. And then the third part is that, like, white people like me have come in and taken their stories and kind of just run with them without bothering to consult them. So I think there's a fear that these stories are going to be misinterpreted or made to be more nightmarish than they are, or facts will be changed around. And I think that's already happened. We just sort of discussed that. It's already happened with the Wendigo anyways.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it was really hard to find someone to talk about it. So I'm really thankful that I could find those three people, and that I could get Alicia, like, on camera talking about it and talking about her experience. I think that really added a lot to the documentary. And I could have recounted a lot of those things or got other people too, but I really thought it was important. I try to do this with every documentary I make, to get Indigenous people to tell their stories as much as they can or they want to.
Yeah. Well, something I've kind of heard a lot of is, and it's kind of mentioned in the documentary too, a lot of the evil entities, they don't want that legend spread because they believe talking about it will bring it to life or into reality.
I could see that. Like, you know, it's just like, and I know, yeah, that was something when I was sort of in Alberta, you know, you'd want to talk to people about it and they just kind of look at you funny. Like, why do you want to do that? Like, you could just bring it upon yourself. I mean, I've said Wendigo so many times in the last year and a half. I haven't started eating people yet. It's not something I'm too worried about, but I know that people take it seriously, and you got to respect that at the same time. You know, and at the same time, someone is going to tell this story. And so I think if you're going to tell it, it needs to be told right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think also like again, this creature is taken or spirit is taken taken up so much real estate within pop culture world, but also just within the paranormal community. People who are interested in knowing more, especially younger generations. Because back in 2007, 2008, when Justin and I first started doing podcasting, we didn't say the Wendigo at all. We didn't use the name. We didn't say it out loud. People were too afraid of it. They didn't want to hear it, and if they did, they would turn the radio off. Nowadays, yeah, it's just thrown about like it's just any other creature, any other story, and there's yet to be any harm that I've noticed come from it. Now, I'm not saying that there won't be harm at some point for somebody who knows. You know, that's situational, I guess, or it's very dependent on the belief systems too. Even, you know, it's like if you don't believe in the Wendigo, can it really come to hurt you, right? As you can think with any of these creatures that exist today, whether it be Bigfoot, whether you know the Dogman, etc. But I always find that really interesting, just how much like time changes people's perspective and understanding on some of these creatures and what they are willing to talk about. You know, nowadays.
No, I agree. Like I think I mentioned before going on, like I was a journalist. I was a crime reporter for 10 years from 2003 to 2014. And if I had mentioned that I was interested in the paranormal and like to hunt ghosts, I would have had zero credibility as a journalist, like none. I probably would have lost my job. And now I'm making documentaries about it, and I have a weekly radio show, and I write these books, and I talk about it freely, and everyone's like, "Cool, man, that's awesome."
Right.
You know, that shows how much things have changed in 20 years. But you also got to look over that time frame. Like shows like Ghost Hunters came along, you know, and Paranormal State, and then Expedition Bigfoot and Expedition X, and all this other stuff. And as much as I think a lot of those shows do the field harm because of the way that they're portrayed, and that's a whole other conversation, it has made it an acceptable thing to talk about at the same time and to get these conversations going. And I think that's great, because I think there's something to all this. And I think it's a natural part of our human experience and an experience on planet Earth and a natural phenomenon. And I think once we understand it, I think we'll understand ourselves and our planet a lot better.
100%.
For sure. I mean, I've believed in dragons for years, and there's a dragon legend in almost every culture around the world. So, do I want dragons to come around? Probably not. I've seen Reign of Fire and the possible future that might have. So, no, I don't want that future at all. But I would love to know a lot of where these legends come from, and if they are real, why are we not finding them yet?
Yeah. And that's the number one question. And that's, I think, when you do get more into supernatural explanations, right? And I mean, the indigenous people with all these stories, they were like, you know, Sasquatch is a spiritual being, you know, Ogopogo is a spiritual being. Hence, they're not always in our world and can move back and forth. The Wendigo, whereas something like a sea monster or a Sasquatch could potentially also have this cryptozoological, like a zoological explanation. The Wendigo is something else entirely. Like it doesn't fit into total cryptid, and it's not exactly a possession story,
right?
And it's kind of also a mental health issue. you know what I mean? Like,
right?
It doesn't fit into this neat box, and I think that's what to me makes it so interesting.
Right.
I think that's what we're realizing with a lot of these creatures now. Yeah, you can't just put them in a single box.
No, they're multidimensional. You know, it's hard to pinpoint exactly who they are, what they are. You know, one question I do have for you though regarding this, while we're on this topic, do you think, like considering Bigfoot might be spiritual, you know, various other cryptids spiritual, this Wendigo possibly spiritual, there was a time where none of these creatures, at least in the broad sense, weren't spiritual. They're supposed to be physical beings, physical cryptids. Do you think people considering them to be spiritual now is because they really believe it to be spiritual, or do you think it's their way, an investigator's way of being able to say, oh, I haven't been able to find a physical thing because it isn't physical. Therefore, you know, is it just a way to kind of save their pride in a way, you think?
That's really interesting because I just had a documentary come out called Sasquatch Legacy, and I met with like some veteran Sasquatch researchers like Thomas Steenberg, Jerry Matthews, Bill Reed, and Brad Trent, who all worked with like Renee DeHinden and John Green and all these like legends in the field, and they believe and they still talk about it this way even after like decades of research. If Sasquatch is real, it's a real being. If it's not real, that's why you haven't found it yet. You know what I mean? And they figure that we'll know just with the way technology is going now, and the way that even large tunnels under highways have like cameras in it, that within about 5 years we'll know for sure if a Sasquatch is real or not. And they are very big on the fact that they think people who go to the paranormal realm for explanations are just like you're saying, they're trying to keep the story alive. They can't figure out a logical explanation, so it's just a way to kind of push like a faith almost, more so than anything else. And I've investigated ghosts for 25 years, and had experiences all my life. I'm confident there's something to it. I can't tell you if it's the spirit of the dead or whatnot, but there's something to it. And so that's why, so it's like, could Bigfoot be something spiritual? I don't think the indigenous people are wrong, but they attribute spiritual explanations to everything.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I've had experiences with something in the woods that definitely seems far more physical than spiritual. So,
right.
Yeah, I think that it's an excuse. Like I say, I don't think it's good to explain an unknown with another unknown. I think you have to approach these things, especially with good hardcore skepticism, and be okay with the fact. Like, what would be so wrong if we proved that Bigfoot isn't real?
Right.
There you go. You solved the mystery. You know what I mean? And it's cool that people believe in it. I think it's a great story. But if you prove that there's no such thing as Sasquatch, then okay, that's a problem solved. Next subject.
Yeah, I think that works best for people who are open-minded about Sasquatch. On the flip side, if there's people, and I was one of these people at one point, where you're just so like committed to the fact that this creature does exist 100%, and everything you do is about this creature existing, and then all of a sudden you learn it doesn't. That causes big kind of collapse on your foundation, right? Because you're building yourself up on this foundation. So for those type of people, it might be very, very difficult and very harsh for them. But yeah, I think if we're open-minded in this, especially in this world, the paranormal world, the spiritual world, then we have nothing to really lose, just more to gain.
I agree, and I've met a lot of the people who are, I hate to use the term fanatical, but who are just so want these things to be real. Like, you know what I mean? And it's just like, yeah, you're right. It would literally kill the fiber of their being to prove that it wasn't. But I mean, I think that's the risk of having too strong a belief in anything. Like, I think, if you're going to get into this line, quote unquote, line of work, you need to be as skeptical as possible. And that's how you can I've been to places where there's been stories about hauntings, and we've had stuff happen that we've been able to debunk. And we're not upset that we debunked it. It's like, cool, because we've also had things happen that we can't debunk, and we have no idea what it was that happened. So that's just part of doing this. And just because you have one thing happen that you can debunk doesn't mean that everything else is BS. Same as if you have something that you can't debunk doesn't mean that everything else that goes on in that house or property is haunted. Right. So everything's got to be approached on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and we do the same thing when it comes to like paranormal investigations, ghosts in particular. It's like we can tell people, yeah, we believe that ghosts exist, and this is our reason why, and here's the evidence. But I can't replicate any of this evidence that we've captured, so I can't actually tell you or prove to you that they do exist. It's just what I've experienced, what I think is true. But if it's not, if I'm wrong, hey, it was a fun time.
Well, and you'll still have those clients though too that you've done the investigation and you're like, we're not getting anything. We don't think there's a haunting here, and they're like, no, you guys are wrong. There's so much stuff that's unexplained. There's ghosts here.
Yeah, I've had those people too, man. I've spent hours at a house, and then just nothing happened. None of the things they ever explained came even remotely close to happening. Like, nothing happened. And when you looked at their shelves, they had like every ghost book and every episode of like Ghost Hunters, and it's like, I think some people just want to be a part of this phenomena, right, in whatever way, shape, or form that they can. I mean, there's people that say that they've sat with tribes of Sasquatch. You know what I mean? And that there's tribes of them and they have their whole culture. And then the ones that are just roaming the woods attacking people are like the outcasts and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, where are you getting this from? Like,
Right.
how do you believe this? And do you really believe that? Or are you just selling a line because you want to make some bucks? Like, it just really, you gotta, no, no.
Right. Now, one part of the documentary, you guys mentioned, let's hope that none of us get possessed by the Wendigo spirit because we're calling it. Was there really that fear? Was it like a joke, kind of a nervous joke? What was that about?
It was kind of a little bit of both, because you can't, in my mind, you can't consider yourself a researcher or investigator and covering a topic like the Wendigo, especially in a place where there's been a report of a sighting of one, without conducting an investigation. So that's what we did. So, all Olivia Aslan and I were the two people doing the investigation, and we decided that one part of that was going to be using the Estes method. And for people who don't know what that is, one person plugs their earphones into a spirit box, which is an AM/FM receiver that spirits are supposed to communicate with, and was wearing the headphones. So he couldn't hear what I was saying. So I would ask questions and then he would answer, not hearing the question that I asked. And I kind of joked that because Wendigos are supposed to possess people, I asked Ollie if he's okay with that. That's, there's a chance that could happen, even though I didn't really believe that it would. But what do I know? It could have happened.
Well, that's like calling a demon's name and expecting it not to come around. Yeah,
exactly. So so it was kind of one part. I was pretty confident we would be okay, but after having spent at that point about a year researching it and filming parts of the documentary, it's like, well, you got to kind of, also be half serious at the same time. And
right.
Ollie was okay with it, and Sean had the rifle, and no one got shot, so everything's fine. No one ate anyone, so we're good.
Yeah, all good for all those accounts.
But people called us both very brave and complete idiots for doing it.
Fine line between genius and idiocy. Yes.
Yeah. But I really liked how the whole sequence turned out in the documentary. It was a nice way to kind of cap things off.
Well, now, while you're actually in the field, like, how do you, especially with the documentaries, like, how do you balance being a storyteller, an investigator, but also being a human being who can still be scared and frightened by things?
You just film what happens.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I approach this. I don't know what's going to happen in it. When you do an investigation for a documentary like this, you have no idea what's going to happen. And so you're going completely open-minded. You conduct your investigation and you film it. And then kind of whatever happens. All I knew with Tracking the Wendigo, with that investigation that we shot, that it was going to be the wraparound segment for the documentary. That's the only thing I really knew I wanted it to be. So whatever happened, good or bad, it would be kind of the beginning and end, with sort of the beginning of the investigation, the setup. And then I really wanted kind of the last act of the documentary, after we've done all this other stuff, to kind of be the culmination in this investigation. I think one part, because people enjoy watching that kind of thing, especially when you get the night vision out and all that. And if something happens, it can be dramatic and it can be very memorable. And, I've always believed that the one thing people remember most about any book or story is how it ends. You can have like the best movie in the world, and if the ending sucks, that's what you remember. Everyone remembers the ending of The Sopranos and hates it, but they forget there's like 8 great seasons of TV before that. However the investigation went would definitely be how people left Tracking the Wendigo feeling.
That's how I felt about Supernatural when it ended. They couldn't have ended it any other way, but it was still a stupid ending in my opinion, just because I loved the show that much. But you always have to end the story, and not everybody's always going to agree with it, unfortunately.
No, I felt at least people who like watching investigations would enjoy the investigation. And once it was shot, I knew that we had some stuff happen that would at least be compelling enough for people to watch and enjoy it. Even though we basically, spoiler alert for people who haven't seen it yet, we were inconclusive as to what we experienced in the woods that night. But I thought it was interesting. It was fun to do. Those are like the fun parts of the shoot, really.
Right.
But now, so it was inconclusive. How does that, like, do you stay awake at night sometimes thinking like, what was that? What really was that? Or is it just, now out of sight, out of mind? It was conclusive and that's it.
Like that's a good one. Like I've had stuff happen, maybe that I haven't filmed, but that I've been investigating. It makes you think like for a long, you still ponder what that was. With the Wendigo shoot, like I'm really curious about what set off that UFO trigger object. Because it was behind me, the sensor facing the other way, and it was a change in temperature that's supposed to set it off. And it went off, and Ollie was looking at it. I had my back to it, but it just went off on its own. We'd been walking around it for like, an hour. Nothing set it off. So what was that? I kind of puzzled about that for a bit, but I had begun post-production on the Sasquatch Legacy documentary at the same time. So I was kind of filming two things, almost wrapping one up and starting another. So I didn't have time to dwell too much on it, unfortunately. I mean, I go back and when we were doing editing, and I'm kind of like, I wonder what did Ollie, when we were doing the Estes method, because I asked the question, are you hungry? And it responded, he said, we are. It's like, what was that? Was that a Wendigo spirit? Did we just narrowly miss the whole worst case scenario on that, or what?
Well, and not only that, it didn't say I, it said we.
Yeah.
So
which that's
multiple.
Interesting. You get into that demonic lore.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. We are Legion.
We
right?
are. Yeah.
Things
right.
like that. Yeah. Who knows, man? Like that was just, to me, that was almost the big stumper. The keep talking. So ask the question about, are you hungry? And we are, but then that was it.
Right. Yeah. Now, I have a problem with this as well, but how do you separate it? It could be in general, but even specific to this case, what might be paranormal from what could be trauma, stress, or suggestion in a witness experience, or even mental illness or mental state?
Oh, that's one. Yeah, that's a tough one, man. It's because I understand how much all of that can influence someone's experience. I find it really interesting that a lot of people who experience paranormal phenomena are trauma survivors in some way, shape, or form. Is it the mind trying to make sense of things? Could be. But you also have experiences where multiple people are experiencing the same thing at the same time. And not everybody there could be, have gone through the similar trauma or something. But I think there's a correlation for sure. Does trauma make you more susceptible to the paranormal? Does it open your mind up more to it? Does being a victim of trauma draw the paranormal to you? I think those are big possibilities, but I think you got to also take into account mental health. I mean, by my colleague, Pete, is an investigator for an ordained exorcist out of Washington State. And a big part of the process is if someone thinks they're possessed, they got to go through a proper psychological evaluation and check for mental health. I've been in people's homes that say their places are haunted, and usually the homeowner leaves. And one of the first things I do is go into the bathroom and look for medication that could suggest things, right? Sorry, folks. Anyone who's just finding that out now, but you got to take that into consideration. You have to.
I think most, paranormal investigators and even clients now realize that, a paranormal investigator has to eliminate mental illness out. And a lot of times, us as investigators will ask, is there any mental illness involved? And some people are truthful, saying, oh yeah, I take this or that for schizophrenia or, whatever. And then like you're saying, there's plenty more that don't, and you still have to investigate to see if it was a lie.
Oh yeah. And even like, are you an abuser of drugs and alcohol?
Right.
Have you been drinking or taking drugs when these experiences have happened? Like it's all got to be taken into consideration.
Right.
When you're doing these things. Don't drink and investigate. It's also a good rule of thumb.
Right.
Well, it's like, and we've told people, it's better that you just tell us the truth up front rather than us finding out about it during the investigation, because that's going to screw up credibility big time. If you're just
huge, and if they're honest and forthright about it, and then you're doing an investigation and you experience something you can't explain, then there you go.
Right.
100%.
Yeah. Well, now, So with this film, do you feel or did you feel a responsibility to the witness at the heart of this case? And if so, how did that guide the way you told the story?
Yeah, I think with anything, like any interviewee, you owe them, doing the best possible job you can to relay their experience. I think that was something that was drilled into me as a journalist. Like, you're telling people stories, so you've got to be respectful and do the best possible job you can, even if you don't necessarily believe it. Like, that's your job.
Right.
As a documentary filmmaker, I think it's the exact same thing. So, I mean, it was cool. Like, oh wow, there's like a alleged Wendigo sighting, like a half hour from where I live, and I'm working on a book about it, and I'm going to make a documentary. Great, because that is great material.
Right.
But you don't exploit it. They didn't want to be on camera, so that's fine. They were okay with using the audio from the interview for the book. That was great. To figure out a way to incorporate that into the film in a respectful manner. Left out certain details that didn't need to be in there, in terms of just talking about, how much her brother's dying was like. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you don't glorify it. And then there's the sighting. We find a location as close as we can to where it was, and let's get to work.
Now, have you had any pushback or strong reactions, both positive or negative, from people who have seen the film or even read the book?
Yeah, most largely positive. I don't like to read YouTube comments too much. The negative ones are typical, what you'd expect. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, the usual kind. But most people have been really good about it. I know. In order to sort of thread things together, because just the nature of the project and timeline, I had to use, some AI to kind of just more to thread scenes together, like nothing that was actually part of the actual story, but just like some graphics and stuff that I didn't really, just more out of necessity. People didn't like that, and I get it. The next film, Sasquatch Legacy, had like almost none, and the project I'm working on now has 0. But that was more done just because you've got to thread things together, and I needed just images to lock stories together. I couldn't afford to create a Wendigo suit or to hire actors to reenact the Swift Runner. You know what I mean? Like, in period clothing in a fort. Like, there's certain things you just can't do.
Right.
But that was really it. Largely, people really like it. The fact is, the views continue to climb. People are still watching it and still discovering it and still buying the book. And I think that just speaks for itself.
That's awesome.
So we are coming up to the end of the show here. But what's next for you? Any forthcoming investigations, films, or other books we should keep an eye out for?
I just last Sunday, released Sasquatch Legacy, which I've mentioned a few times, and it's about Sasquatch in British Columbia, and we touch on the Indigenous storytelling and legends that became where it started. And then, like I mentioned, we also went to Harrison Hot Springs, which is like the Sasquatch capital of Canada, and worked alongside Thomas Steenberg and Jerry Matthews to kind of hear like the history of the Sasquatch research and these sightings at Harrison Hot Springs. Investigated some locations like the Ruby Creek sighting with Thomas. And then we also had an investigation, a sighting in the interior of British Columbia that I made kind of a wraparoundish story because it was fairly recent. And then we investigated that location where the sighting occurred, and had some interesting things happen once again. So that was a really good, and I learned a lot from between Wendigo and working on Sasquatch Legacy, even though they really overlapped in filming. But as filming of Sasquatch Legacy went along, I think I just became a better filmmaker, more confident filmmaker. And just, it was great to work with these guys who are like legends in the Sasquatch community. So if people are interested in Sasquatch from a Canadian perspective, I really hope people check it out. And it's currently playing on Small Town Monsters YouTube channel. Next year, myself and Alexander Petikoff, who does a series for them called Bigfoot Beyond the Trail, and I are going to collaborate on a project on Vancouver Island. So it's like we're going to Ape Island here in Canada and tackling the Sasquatch stories on Vancouver Island. And he's going to have a film out of it. I'm going to have a YouTube special, and I'm writing a book about the entire experience that we have.
Awesome.
That's
Now,
next year.
For Sasquatch Legacy, not that that's what this episode is about, but was there anything in that investigation or documentary that really caught your attention, evidence wise or even story wise, that you're like, yeah, this tells more of the Sasquatch story than what I previously knew?
I thought it was interesting, depending on who you talk to. Some Indigenous people are really open to talking about Sasquatch, And some just don't want to talk about Sasquatch because they see it as it almost, depending on which tribe, they have different belief systems. In some tribes it's good, some tribes it's evil. So that took me by surprise. We came across a couple prints that I thought was really interesting that could have been potential prints. BC is really bad for prints, just by the nature of the terrain. And then, like, when we were kind of doing this investigation at this gentleman, Kenton J. Moore Experience, right around the week that we were getting there, he had activity on his farm that something went in to the chicken coop, which was locked, went in and just tore apart a whole bunch of their chickens and dragged the remains out into the yard. Around the same time that one night their dogs went nuts and chased something up a ridge behind their property and came back 20 minutes later, like just terrified. The dogs were just terrified. And literally you could draw a straight line from his property to where the experience happened, like about 15 minutes down the road. So, and we had something in the woods with us there that you could smell it and it wasn't pleasant. So could have been a lot of
common denominator for Sasquatch.
Yeah. I thought that was really interesting. So I can't say it was a Sasquatch. We didn't see anything. You know what I mean? But you put all these pieces together and something was there that was predatory. To me, the chicken coop was fascinating. Mm-hmm. That wasn't just like a bear smashing in or a coyote or wolf. Something had to open the door to get to get the chickens.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So
that was pretty fascinating.
That's definitely something that stands out, as significant, I think, and I've seen my sister has chickens and she's not had any coyotes. Her cars her house and yard are fenced in, but she's seen hawks dive bomb onto this fence, to try to get in. And it's clear that, animals will do anything they can to get into these chicken coops. And most of it is not always the most brilliant way. It's like trying to just break their way into metal. So when you see something that's unlocked the gate is able to walk in potentially and walk back out, that's significant.
That was really telling to us. There's something more going on there.
Right.
Now, for everybody watching, listening, who want to dig deeper into your work, where's the best place to find you and support your work, and where can they find the upcoming projects?
I guess, Small Town Monsters, smalltownmonsters.com. You can find like Cursed Waters and Legend of Ogopogo there, plus the book Heart of Ice, Tracking the Wendigo. Their YouTube channel currently has Tracking the Wendigo and Sasquatch Legacy, and that's where the other projects will debut. They usually premiere on their YouTube and then expand out onto different platforms from there. You can find me on Instagram, Jason Hewlett Official. That's usually a really good place to keep up with me. And I'm on Facebook as well, Jason Hewlett. There's a bunch of Jason Hewletts on Facebook, so I'm the guy that literally has the Sasquatch Legacy logo on as his cover photo at the time.
Well, that's why I was glad you shared the show, because I looked for you on Facebook. I'm like, I can't find this guy anywhere.
There's another guy that writes, and we get mixed up a lot, but he writes like inspirational. He's an inspirational and faith speaker.
Okay.
We get confused, but once you start talking to us for any length of time, you realize there's a big difference.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for being on ParaTruth Reborn. And we will definitely get you on again to talk Sasquatch as well, because, again, we love talking cryptids. So I'm going to put you into limbo for a second so we can close out the show. Just hold on for me, okay?
You betcha.
All right. Any final thoughts on Wendigo?
I mean, they have always been and stand to be creepy creatures and spirits. There's a reason why we talk about them as often as we do, and why people tend to never seem to get enough of them.
Right. Well, and the one thing I'll say is, if you're talking to somebody who's from Indigenous culture or Indigenous background, be respectful. If they don't want you to talk about something, obviously don't. It's not very nice to be talking about something that people don't want you to. So, believe it or not, next week is not just Christmas, but the ParaTruth Christmas episode as well. We're also going to be on Paranormal Hearts Christmas episode, so stay tuned for that as well, which I believe, if I remember right, comes out Tuesday as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We'll
is
be
that
on-
right?
Yeah, we'll be on twice that day.
Right.
I'm not
So, yeah, and that's something we've got to discuss is what do we cover? Because we've covered so much for Christmas, unless we just make like a amalgam of all of the stuff we've talked about. But all right, folks, that's all we've got for this week. As we've said at the beginning, this has been a live show. I was going to say pre-recorded, not anymore, on 107.7 FM New Orleans, 105.3 FM on the Gulf Coast, and United Public Radio Network. Until next week, where you'll find us same time, same channel. My name is Justin.
And I'm Erik. Peace.